or shortcut to start off with, but you can start the clock in terms of timing because it kind of fits in with the paper. So this paper is not a central part of my research, and some of you may know that Cardiff University, where I'm currently employed, is making a number of cuts to programs and everything, and I've taken voluntary redundancy, so I'll be leaving Cardiff University at the end of July. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing next. I'll mention something of it right at the end of the paper, but potentially I may not be doing much more with this paper. But I wanted to do it because it was a chance to talk about something a little bit more fun than what I normally talk about. A lot of my research revolves around the world's deadliest single plane crash, which happened in Japan. And just as a side note here, I would like to thank two of my former students, Emily Rodwell and Stefania Papandokonstantaki, who encouraged me to put forward a paper proposal and who also introduced me to two of the things I will be discussing in my paper. When I was thinking about what to cover, I could have looked at a particular media that I enjoy and look at the comedy within it. So like a manga like Kurosagi Shitai Taku Haibin or the Tsurubaki Nishi movie series. But rather than do that, and partly because I may be coming to the end of my academic career, I thought actually it's much more interesting and maybe more relevant to the majority of you who are significantly younger than me here, to actually take a longitudinal view across Japanese movies and comedy within them. Not just within the time I've been dealing with Japan, which is from the late 80s through to now, but also some before that. And hopefully it will raise issues and things which will be useful for all of you. Fundamentally, what I'm going to be looking at is obviously most comedy that is produced in Japan is for the Japanese domestic audience. But I want to suggest that there have always been some which have reached beyond Japan and been popular beyond Japan. And now, thanks to YouTube, Netflix, and so on, there's greater access to Japanese media. And I want to sort of just throw out there some ideas about which ones might become more popular, what happens with humor, and so on in all of this. Now, naturally, comedy taste, humor taste vary from person to person. And I don't want to be suggesting that if a director is looking to make his comedy movie popular overseas, there's a particular answer or anything like that, because what works for one market won't work for another and one individual and so on. And I also don't want to get to a point of being sort of saying there is a Japanese style of humor. It's overly reductive, inaccurate, and I think all of us can find examples of a huge wide range of humor in Japan in reality, quite often with parallels in our own countries as well. So Japanese comedy and humor is wide and varied, much as it is in Britain where I live. It is also very easy, of course, to cherry pick examples to prove points. And I suspect that that's exactly what I'll be doing in today's presentation, but hey, I hope you enjoy the ride. I'm going to try and pull out some examples which I think could be particularly succession. I need to say now that there are going to be spots throughout, so if I'm introducing to you any films and stuff which you're not familiar with and you think, oh, I might want to watch it, you're going to just skip those slides and cover. You need to cover your terms of the video clips. All of the video clips, I think there is no sound, so don't panic when you don't hear sound. Most of them I put subtitles on, but this will require a little bit of multitasking on your part, both to listen to me and to watch the video clip and read the slide. Obviously, that's easier. Sorry, that was a bad attempt at some humor myself. itself. Web on some slides. These are links to blog posts that I've done on some of these outputs. Right, after that overly long introduction, let's get into it. And the first movie I wanted to introduce from the 1960s is Tsubaki Sanjiro, directed by Kurosawa in 1962. I love the humor in this for an international audience to pick up on. What I find also interesting is if you'd watch the characters in the background, although I think they are picking up on the fact that this is not really his name and he's telling a joke, there's no outburst of humor and laughter and so on their side. In another scene, Itami, which became really popular outside Japan, and here I need to provide the context for the younger members in the audience today. In the 1980s in the UK, for example, we would not get Japanese films at the cinema other than maybe a few arty cinemas. And we might get maybe one film a year, if we're lucky, shown on British terrestrial TV. There's no satellite TV in the 1980s. We only had 4 channels. And Juzo Otami films were picked up and shown on TV. This was my introduction to Japanese films in many respects, were his films, which many of them contain elements of comedy. And again, I think there are times where the comedy is easy to understand because of the nature of the physicality and everything. So here in this scene that's just played out, we have the uncle who is worried about whether this coffin has been placed in the right direction or not. And this is something that plays out for about 5 minutes in the film, as we will be seeing in further clips. Another film by Juzo Itami is Tampopo, and this one at one level is ironic that I'm not sharing with you the noise, but I think just from the facial actions and what's going on, you can imagine the sound that is going on. You've got this woman trying to teach other Japanese women the etiquette of eating European food, particularly here spaghetti, and how you don't make a noise as you take in the spaghetti in the way that you would do when eating ramen and so on. Whilst in the meantime, in the background, we've got a foreigner who is slurping away and making huge amounts of noise. Just to mention, if you're not familiar with Tampopo, if you look at the thumbnail of the cover of the DVD poster and so on, the character over on the left-hand side, the person there, the actor is Ken Watanabe in one of his first ever films. In fact, one time I was watching the film and didn't even realize it was him. I was quite shocked when I saw his name in the credits because he is so young in that film. Let's just pop back to Ososhiki for a second and see how the uncle is getting on. He's still trying to figure out which way is north and south, whilst in the meantime, the dialogue is going on in the background and so on, so the story can continue. If I jump on another couple of decades and we get to Okuribito, this is a wonderful film, did very well internationally, getting awards and so on. It also stars Tsutomu Yamazaki, who appeared in both Ososhiki and Tampopo. In fact, I would be very happy if somebody would do a paper just all about the life of Yamazaki. I think it would be very interesting to read. And he also stars in another film, which I will be coming to shortly. But again, I think part of the reason why the comedy in this film worked internationally is that it was so easy to follow, even where in a clip like this, it is a linguistic joke that is the heart of it. There's a lot of very physical humor in this film as well. But here, the linguistic bit can be explained quite simply, and I think audiences could then sort of keep engaged with it. Yes, the uncle is still trying to figure out which way north and south is. Another film that came out in 2008 is Climbers High, and this is where I can link into my other research and the Japan Airlines crash of 1985. Climbers High originally was a novel that came out in 2003. NHK did a dramatization in 2005, A movie came out in 2008, and then the official English translation came out under the title 17 rather than Climbers High in 2018. This is not a comedy, okay? It really isn't. It's dealing with plane crash and also other quite dark issues. However, there is some comedy, just a tiny bit in the original novel, but in the movie version, there was additional comedy. And I know from having interviewed the director and read stuff that he's said and so on, he was really expecting and hoping that this film would have an international reach. In the end, that didn't happen. Largely, I think, because it came out the same year as Okuribito, Departures, and the world at that time could only cope with one Japanese film in a year, it seems. There are maybe other reasons why this film didn't do so well. However, as I said, he did introduce some comedy into the movie, which is not in the original. So in this particular scene, where they're discussing how some of the elders within a newspaper company, which is going to be reporting on the plane crash, don't want to change their ways. One of the reporters refers to these people as being dinosaurs and turns their names into actually sounding like the names of dinosaurs themselves. And again, this is something which would be easy to understand for a non-Japanese audience and so on. In another clip, two of the reporters are chatting, and there's a lovely throwaway line which I'll let you read when it comes up in a second. Again, very easy for anybody to understand. It doesn't require any international understanding, cultural understanding, and so on. As I said, there was a little bit of comedy in the original novel, and this was kept in the NHK version. There's no subtitles for this, and I'm not going to show so I'll just talk around the key thing. The guy on the left here, this is the main reporter, Yuki. He's trying to climb Mount Tanigawa with the son of a friend. In the novel and in the NHK version, this son has ended up going out with Yuki, the main protagonist there, going out with his daughter. And as they're climbing Mount Tanigawa, the young guy here asks whether he can marry Yuki's daughter. To which, prepare yourself for drum roll and laughter, Yuki says, "We'll talk about it when we get to the top of the mountain." Not the best humor ever, but rather amusing. But it doesn't get kept in the movie version, because in the movie version, Yuki's daughter does not exist. So that joke was lost in place of other humor they introduced. Right, now let me introduce you to my favorite Japanese movie. If you haven't seen it, this is my big recommend for your weekend viewing. It's on Netflix, Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead. The key thing you need to be aware of for the backstory to the clip I'm showing you is the protagonist, Tendo, has recently graduated. He's working at a Japanese company. I think it's kind of modeled on Dentsu, maybe, but you didn't hear me say that. Where he thought he was going to be working in advertising and doing lots of exciting things. And then he finds that he's got to work incredibly long hours, to the extent sometimes he does not get home at all. He is on the point of dying from karoshi, basically. And then one day he wakes up and he discovers there are zombies everywhere. We never get it explained where they've come from or anything. They're just there, and the story just rolls with it. And then we get this wonderful scene which lives rent-free in my head, and I revisit on a regular basis. And I think it speaks to any of us who feel trapped in a situation. And I will just let it play out now for you to enjoy. And the original Japanese there, as you would have seen from my title slide, was Yatta. This film is very much a comedy. It is not a zombie horror film. It's got a few scenes, but essentially it's a comedy. Now, this next scene from the film, one of the reasons why I like it is Jaws is my favorite English language movie. So the fact there's a shark in it is great. Keep in mind, this shark has already eaten several divers. So it is now turned into a zombie shark. And I just love the logic of the film, that it just is so ridiculous. It's internally consistent with what it can do and so on. And I think, again, this comedy is very easy for any audience to appreciate. I don't think this film is very well known in Japan. I've actually been to the aquarium where they filmed this. There's no publicity related to the film, so you can't really do the contents tourism and buying stuff, but you can at least see the fish tank and so on. But again, I think the comedy there is easy to understand. And in this final clip that I'll show from the film, where Tendo has now got the suit which should resist from piercing and so on. Again, the comedy, I think, is very easy to understand, although if you watch the Japanese or can lip read, you'll realize that they've been quite liberal with the translation in terms of what they do, but it's still very straightforward. Now, translations. I'm going to talk about here an example of what we can, other things we can see on Netflix. So Netflix has been getting more and more Japanese TV series and putting them up, originally just from TBS, but more and more they're getting from other companies as well. They always come with both English and Japanese subtitles, but sometimes the humor does not translate. So in this particular example, this is from the TV series Tengoku to Jigoku, so Heaven and Hell. The thing you need to be aware of is the two characters, the male and female, their characters have actually been swapped. So the woman is inside the man and the man inside the woman. And the English subtitles there play out. It's kind of funny, talking about curiosity killed the cat. This is an English phrase which is used in the original Japanese. And for the subtitles, they play on curio. Kind of funny. I have to admit in advance now, this next clip, when I show it with the Japanese subtitles, I laughed probably more than it really deserves, but it really tickled me. Just try and read the subtitles as they go through. I assume most of you can speak Japanese. If you can't, I'll explain at the end. So as you can see, still got curiosity killed the cat. So picking up on the sound from curiosity, curie being a cucumber. I think it's hilarious, but maybe that's just me. Also, these days you can find Japanese movies sometimes on YouTube. An example of this is this film Happy Flight, which is from the early 2000s. It's directed by Shinobu Yaguchi, who's done a variety of films which are described as comedy. Other than scenes like this, which I think are very easy for anybody to understand, I question the level of comedy at some times. I find some of the films actually quite cringy and difficult to watch. But again, I think this points to humor is very individual. What we find is very individual, but it shows again that stuff is out there. And on mentioning YouTube, one of the final things I want to discuss is netajin. Now, this, a bit like Taikenden, which Stefano talked about in his paper on day one, I think a lot of this, we have to assume the stories that netajin talks about are not genuine stories. These are, although they're situational, I think they're made up, but they're a type of situational story, which, as Stefano talked about, is an element of Japanese humor. And also referring back to the papers this morning, Sarah and Ryota's papers, there's kind of a rakugo feel to it. It's all up there on YouTube. One thing I would say personally, I find the way that he introduces his sketches, where he literally does an introduction like this, talks about what's going to come up. This can go on for several minutes before we get into here. You can see the sort of sketch that he does. I find it very dry. and it takes me out of the mood. This is very against what we get when you go to a comedy show in Britain, where you've got the main act and usually there's another comedy act beforehand to just get you in the mood for laughing. I find Netadjin's videos do the exact opposite. It gets me out of the mood before actually watching the clips. But again, although he's using Osaka Ben and there are subtitles up there in Japanese, some of it I think is also very easy just from looking at it. Inherently, just how funny something like that is. And I would actually suggest that for those wanting to make the transition, starting to try and learn Japanese, watching humor like this could be very helpful. Now, final thing I'm going to say, I'm nearly at the end now. I want to flip it the other direction and talk about what happens with Western movies, English, American, European, etc., when they are translated into Japanese. And here I wanted to give an example of Goldfinger, the James Bond film. I watched this one time whilst on an airplane going to Japan, and it had the Japanese subtitles on. And I was shocked at what happened. Here we will get an example of British humor, a pun. The person who's been electrocuted. It was shocking. He then sees her topless. Positively shocking. I can't remember which version I saw on the airplane. I've gone searching on the internet to see what versions are out there with the Japanese subtitles. I have come across versions which have the katakana shocking. How many Japanese will pick up on the double meaning going on? I've also seen versions with them saying shogeki taki desu and osoroshi, but, and I have a feeling this may be the official version, I also came across this. If the slide will load, oh no, PowerPoint is going to crash on me at this point, it looks. I'll just tell you then that James Bond, when turning around and seeing the person in the bath, just says, kawaii ne, it's scary, which I think is probably the scariest thing about that particular subtitle. As I said, I'm not sure what, if anything, I will do with this research and presentation. I just wanted to provide everybody with ideas and stimulus and so on. If you are wondering about the color of my slides in the background, this is officially gold color, as in Goldfinger, and also comedy gold. As I said, I'm currently at Cardiff University, but I will be leaving at the end of July. I'm also going off to Japan in September to do a 4-month fellowship based in Tokyo, and I will be going to EAGS in Sendai, so hopefully see some of you then. That's everything.